Now we're live. Nice slide in, Chris. What's up? It is.
That's what I do.
It is 7 p.m. on Tuesday, April 29th. As always, we like to give a couple minutes for people to come on in, grab a seat, grab some snacks at the bar. They are free. We have a great group with us tonight, so I'm super excited. In the meantime, please say hello. Let us know where you're from, and we'd love to give you a shout out. And then we're going to get to questions pretty quick. So we will start by just some intro and some information that we think might be helpful, and then we are ready to answer questions. So yeah, let us know where you're from. See, we have hi, Jess is on the stream. She says hi, Carol, Chrissie, and Ethan. She doesn't like John, apparently. Claire, what time will this be for US and the UK? Now? Somebody was asking what time in the UK would it be now?
It's midnight. It's midnight in the UK right now.
Midnight. So Charlotte is eager to hear Carol speak, so we will make sure we will let her talk once or twice. Lindsay Robbins says, hi, Carol. I should have never had Carol on here. Like, we're just invisible. we're just invisible.
Hi, Lindsay. Hi, Charlotte.
Celine from Maryland. Hi, Haley. We love you. Anna Smith from Virginia. We got Lindsay from Easton, Massachusetts. Gwyneth says hello. Michelle Carroll, our dear friend from New Orleans. Gwyneth from Ohio.
Oh, hi,
Michelle. Paul Browning says, greetings from Vancouver, British Columbia. Hi, Carol. Not sure if you remember, I was a patient in your intrusive thought at the OCDI in 2015. Just nod your head.
Hi.
Jeff Shemansky said no one likes John. That is very true.
Because I speak the truth. Because I speak the truth. You can't handle the truth about intrusive thoughts.
So it is 2 minutes went by like that. So we will get rolling. Thank you all for being here. This is Intrusive Thoughts Volume 2. This is anything and everything regarding coping with and talking about intrusive thoughts. On this stream, nothing is off limits. We really want to dive in and discuss everything from sexual intrusive thoughts to violent thoughts, taboo thoughts, everything in between. We've got an amazing guest, amazing panel, which I will get to shortly. So my name is Ethan Smith. If you don't know me, I'm the National Ambassador for the International OCD Foundation. My spiel, I have OCD. I like to talk about it. That's pretty much it. Let me just read over this disclaimer real quick. So the live stream is intended to serve as educational content and is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. The International OCD Foundation is not a crisis hotline and should not be used if you are in distress or feel unsafe. If you are in a crisis or you're ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the Suicide Prevention Hotline. And Jess, I think we have that number in the overlays, but it's 800-273-8255. And then, as always, I like to say, be respectful, be kind. We try to create as safe an environment as possible to have some of these difficult conversations. Because this is focused on intrusive thoughts, we know that the content we discuss may be graphic. So if you are a teenager or a young child or your parents are with you, I would consider that and watch with discretion. And I think that covers everything. So thank you for being here. I'm really excited to introduce our guests. So we will start with the man in the top left corner, Jon Hershfield. MFT is the director of the OCD and Anxiety Center of Greater Baltimore, soon to be the director of the OCD and Anxiety Center Pratt. Congratulations, John. He's the author. We need to fix your bio because he's the author or co-author. We're still not sure. To be determined.
I like that because then I can just list the titles instead of being like author, co-author, author, co-author.
Yeah, we don't know. But he wrote something with the mindfulness workbook for OCD, everyday mindfulness for when a family member has OCD, overcoming harm OCD, and the forthcoming OCD workbook for teens. He puts Old Bay on his eggs, works out angrily to the New York Times daily podcast, is very much looking forward to season 3 of OCD. I just pulled up your old one.
Yeah, that's an old bio because I finished Ozark and it was wonderful.
Oh, did you? Was it? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Very satisfying.
To John's next, we have the incomparable and lovely Chrissie Hodges. Hi, Chrissie. Chrissie's a certified peer. Oh, hi. Okay. Chrissie's a peer certified support specialist through Treatment for OCD Consulting. She is the chief operating officer and co-founder of Peer Recovery PRS. PRS was awarded the government contract to place peer support specialists in the entire state of Colorado, civilian and forensic mental health institutions. I added entire state. It just sounded bigger than just Colorado, but it's cool either way.
There's only 2 institutes, but thank you.
Way to go. Way to go. Chrissie is the author of Pure OCD, The Invisible Side of Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, and is an international advocate for mental health, specifically for OCD. She is the founder and executive director of the nonprofit OCD Game Changers, to which had an amazing conference in March, to which Jon and I were both at, and it was a really amazing experience. So thank you, Chrissie, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Last but certainly not least, out of hiding at the OCD Institute, Carol Hevia is a licensed psychologist and has worked with OCD and related disorders for 30 years. So she's been practicing since she was 3. She has been working with OCD at McLean Hospital for 15 years. She loves working with the OCD population and intrusive thoughts. She has led the intrusive thoughts group at the OCDI for approximately 14 years, her favorite group. And in her small time, she runs a small private practice that focuses on OCD and other anxiety disorders. I was in her intrusive thoughts group in 2010 when I was at the OCDI, as I'm sure many of people were watching. So Jon, Chrissie, Carol, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. See you later. So as always, before we get to questions, I really want to open it up to just some initial thoughts and keep it personal raw. So Jon, let's start with you. I asked you earlier to just kind of weigh in on your take on intrusive thoughts or COVID or how it's related or what you're seeing in your patients or what you're seeing with yourself. So how was Ozark?
Yeah. Opening to intrusive thoughts. That's the line of work that we're in, right? I've been thinking about a lot today, which is, I guess, not exclusive to intrusive thoughts and OCD, but OCD in general and specific to COVID, is how we get into trouble by training our attention to look at the small, scary things at the risk of missing important elements of the large and important things. So for example, with COVID, I'm seeing a lot of clients who are, very worried about a tiny detail, like, didn't the sleeve of my shirt touch the mailbox when I went outside, and then later bump into my bookshelf. And now I'm thinking, do I need to disinfect my bookshelf? And missing the sort of bigger picture of, okay, we're doing social distancing, we're staying 6 feet apart, we're wearing masks outside. That's like 99% of what you need to do to stay safe. But some of us are only focusing on that 1% of what if I make a mistake and then I'm going to be really humiliated and ashamed if I get sick or get someone else sick. And the real problem with that is it doesn't really have anything to do with staying safe. It has to do with focusing with how you train your attention, because people often put themselves in less safe situations because they're not paying attention to the important things. They're focused on these little details. So they're doing all sorts of, worrying about whether or not their fingernail maybe touched their wrist as they're removing their glove after, getting gas at the gas station or something like that. And while they're worrying about that, they didn't notice that they put their finger in their eye to scratch an itch. And I think we do this with intrusive thoughts as well, where we have these sort of big ticket morality items of I'm doing basically what I can to be a basically good person. And, I'm trying not to harm anyone. And I'm sort of living a life that I think is more or less in line with my sexual identity or my gender identity or whatever it might be. And then we get these what if thoughts, these intrusions of like, yeah, that's all well and good, but what if the thing that like is the least likely to be possible comes true? You wouldn't be able to handle that. And then we end up shifting our attention over to that and trying to solve that problem. Meanwhile, forgetting to tend to the rest of our sense of self, like who we are. And so it gets very, very confusing. So I don't know really where I'm going with this, but it's something that's been sort of coming up in a lot of my sessions today. So it's been on my mind, just this idea that we spend so much time worrying about that 1%. And the problem with that is that you're training your attention to keep coming back to that instead of staying stationary on this 99%, where actually we are in command of what we're doing. We are in command of our behavior. So that's my intro, I guess.
For some people might say, though, that COVID is maybe more than 1%. Therefore, they should be more hypervigilant.
Well, no, what I'm talking about is the vigilance part is do social distancing, do your civic duty, don't flood the hospitals with sick people. So, only go out for essential reasons. If you go out and you're touching things out there, then wash your hands, wear a mask if you're supposed to wear a mask, and stay within, 6 feet from everybody. There, that you've done that. So you've done 99% of what any human being could be expected to do at this stage to keep themselves safe. Does that guarantee you won't get COVID? No, because there's that 1% where, there's something that flew in at the, on the wings of a fly through the screen of your apartment and somehow got in. And if you're going to devote your attention to making sure that you're safe from that, you have to take attention away from that other 99% that you're already doing a great job of. So not only are you going to become increasingly insecure of whether or not you're safe, you're also probably putting yourself in a situation where you're more likely to do something unsafe and put yourself at risk. Is that clear?
It's great. 100%. Yep, absolutely. It's great. If you're just tuning us out, who knows? But if you're just tuning in, feel free to get your questions loaded in the comment box. We will definitely be addressing questions in the next 10 minutes. I want to turn now to a wonderful advocate and one of my dearest friends, Chrissie Hodges, whose hair, fortunately, is here to deflect from my hair. I can't go. I have to make one hair joke.
Smaller though. It has since we first started.
Smaller. That's fair. It has gotten smaller. So I love you, Chrissie, because you come from a peer support specialist angle, but you also come from lived experience. And I think in many cases, you have a real opportunity with the people that you sort of get down and dirty into the nuggets of what people are really dealing with. So speak from your heart, but also what are you seeing? What are you feeling? What are some things that are coming up for people that maybe we aren't hearing about that we need to be talking about?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for having me on, Ethan. It's an honor to be here with three of you. So I do peer support with people worldwide. The one thing I definitely want to mention is that I'm certified. So I've gone through all the training, supervision, and I've gotten credentialed through my state in Colorado. So it's important if someone is going to work with someone and support them in the capacity of a peer support that you do the proper training and you go through the avenues of being able to do it correctly. So I do peer support, and it's been a few interesting waves going on in what's happening with COVID. And if you don't know, we've been doing fireside chats over at OCD Game Changers. Ethan, you've been on one. Jon, you've been on one. Carol, we'll have to get you on one. Apparently, it takes everybody in the world. Everybody in the world wants to see you, so come on. But either way, it's been interesting to watch kind of the emotional roller coaster and waves that people who are coming onto the fireside chats are also mirroring the clients that I'm seeing, whether that's clients that I've been seeing for a long time or those that are just reaching out right now for support. From what at first it was very much, I see mostly individuals who are living with what we refer to as the pure OCD, which is going to be intrusive thoughts with mental rituals is the nickname for the community of people who experience that. Because of my YouTube channel, people find me, I'm always talking about violent, sexual, intrusive thoughts and the gruntle and everything else you can talk about in regards to that. So that's the community of people I'm typically supporting. And at first it was very much this, I don't care about COVID. I just want to know if I'm a pedophile or if I'm going to murder my family. The end. Who cares? And then it kind of went into this, oh, wait, this is new reality. This isn't just passing in the next couple weeks. And then it moved into, oh, no. Isolation is bringing up a lot of intrusive thoughts, maybe that I've had before, or maybe that I've worked through, or even bringing on new ones. And now it seems in this past week, I'm meeting with people and it's almost like full circle to COVID relating somehow to intrusive thoughts. And I think that the brilliant and interesting thing that I feel so privileged to be able to work with people is that their experience is mirroring mine. As someone who lives with OCD, lives with intrusive thoughts, I feel lucky to be able to have the community of people who I'm supporting, but also we just get to share our own experiences as we're going through this unprecedented time. So, I mean, all I can say is this: if my story is very much similar to most people's. I struggled with OCD for 12 years and had no idea, because it was sexual orientation OCD, fear of vomiting, scrupulosity, suicide attempt, hospitalization, and then finally treatment, because I was lucky enough to find someone that would do it in my state. So that is my story with it. But what I want to say to anyone listening right now, I consider myself to be in recovery. 100%. And recovery to me means managing OCD every day. But I want you to know that whatever you're experiencing right now, whether it be intrusive thoughts or not, or it's coming and going, or whatever emotional response, I am right there with you, walking alongside with you, because this is a greater area of uncertainty. Whereas Jon was talking about, like before, it's just kind of like we hone in on little things that we're accepting uncertainty about. And all of a sudden our entire world is uncertain. And so under that umbrella, OCD can go wild in all these different areas. So my hope tonight is that even in hearing anything that I say, that that you're not alone, that that people are right there with you, whether that be emotional or symptoms of OCD.
For sure, Chrissie, and thank you. Like, I totally agree with you. Actually, like, I'm starting to sort of feel all this week. Last week, I've sort of felt worn down and kind of really feeling some of that groundhog weirdness that's going on, and struggling to like make sense of it and try not to make sense of it at the same time. So I really resonate with you on that. And so thank you, because you're definitely not alone in this group. Okay, Carol, so here's the deal. You're breaking the internet. Literally everybody's like, can't believe Carol's on Facebook. Thought I'd never see the day.
Yeah.
I won't call everybody out, because a couple of people say you kicked them out of your intrusive thoughts group. We don't know why. They may have been too graphic. We'll leave it alone. But you've got a massive fan base, so I have to get to you before there's a riot. So Carol, along the lines of what we've been talking about, I mean, what have you been seeing? What shifts have you been seeing during this time from sort of the status quo? And also, if you want to talk a little bit about how residential's changed and how you're maneuvering around that as well, whatever you feel is applicable.
I see the people who are on the unit, and our census decreased a little bit so that we could accommodate the social distancing and requirements such as that. But the people on the unit have continued to do their ERP work, and I think that they have really worked hard at being very focused. Ironically, you'd think they would be more anxious, but I really see the people who are outpatient and still working or not working as the ones who are struggling more, and the anxiety's kicking up again. There's so much more downtime. There's all of a sudden your daily structure is totally discombobulated. When you go to the grocery store is different. When you go to the pharmacy is different. How do you fill up gas? Now you have to wear a mask. All of that stuff is very unsettling. And it also continually is giving the message that the world is not a safe place, which is not a great place to sit if you have OCD, because that's what your brain keeps telling you. The world isn't safe. The world isn't safe. No. So, and the other thing I keep hearing a lot about is people saying, I need to get anxious about COVID, because if I'm not anxious, the anxiety is what helps me to be careful enough. Mm-hmm. So I can't give up. In other words, I cannot give up my OCD right now, because I need it so I can stay vigilant and keep my family safe.
And it reminds me of kind of what I was thinking about just this idea that focus on, look, you already have OCD and you're already being vigilant, and now you're directing your attention away from the natural vigilance to this other kind of vigilance that actually isn't keeping you safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Also the shame that goes around with it. So you're experiencing shame because you're not focusing your attention on COVID when a lot of people around you are.
Yeah, feeling guilty that they don't see. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just listening. You guys are awesome. Carol, I better ask you a follow-up, because I might get maimed by the 100 people that are you're seeing you on Facebook for the first time ever. So in regards to is there, I'm trying to decide how to phrase this question, but okay, I don't know. In a way, is being in residential in terms of OCD in this moment almost a safer place feeling to be because you're not out in the world with all this? And then what is the anticipatory anxiety and the buildup to release and having to go out into all this and face sort of, normally there's a lot of uptick in anxiety and OCD just because you're transitioning back home where you may have additional triggers. Now you're transitioning into this unusual world that we're in now. What are you saying?
I
lost what you were asking because the question is so long.
I know. I'm a windy guy. Sorry. The first question was the safety of residential versus being outside.
I think it does feel safer, and all of the restrictions are not necessarily helpful for cultivating the culture of facing your fears. So we had to add face masks. So when people are on the unit, they have to wear masks. Well, on the one hand, that's kind of uncomfortable. And on the other hand, maybe it's keeping you safe. The hand washes, we had to, I'm pretty militant about how many hand washes people can usually have. And now I have to accommodate what the CDC recommends. So I do think, and just because we eliminated the outings for right now, people are basically staying right on the ground. So I think it does feel safer. They don't have to push themselves as much. I think discharge brings a lot of anxiety. How am I going to do all of these things when I get home? I have to take out the garbage. I have to make my own food. I have to get my own food. What do? Do I wipe down my groceries? Do I not wipe down my groceries? There's a lot of things that they're trying to figure out.
Yeah, that makes sense. Go ahead, John.
Well, I wanted to ask Carol a question. I'm really curious about this. I would imagine there's some people in residential who, upon discharge, are going to go home, but their jobs aren't waiting for them the way they were because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And there's maybe a lot of shame or guilt around that. And so being in residential is like, well, it's functioning as a placeholder for I'm where I'm supposed to be because I can't work in residential. So knowing that when they then return to their homes, they're going to be expected to work, but maybe they can't work or work has changed or something like that. That's a lot to take in at once.
Yeah. And usually when people are leaving us, we're saying you have to do something outside the house 20 to 30 hours a week. Now, for most people, that isn't going to happen. And the 20 to 30 hours a week, whether it's volunteer or a job, that's going to help them maintain their gains.
Right.
Now they have to try and keep busy at home. Some of them are going to go home to live alone. Some of them are going to go home to families who are also stressed. I think it'll be a challenging transition.
They're going to need a lot of self-compassion because they're going to, many of them are going to be thinking, I'm not doing enough.
Right.
And before, I didn't have to worry about that because I was in residential. That's why I wasn't doing enough. Now I'm not in residential and I'm expected to do more and I can't, but I don't have that fallback of, but I'm in residential,
Yeah. And I find at the unit, there is a cultural support. When they're at home with their families, if someone the family there aren't necessarily other people with OCD. Here, they've got so many other people who have OCD, and all they have to say is, I'm having a terrible day. And everybody else around them gets it immediately. Then when they go home, they lose that, even though, they're all doing FaceTime and Zoom and all sorts of things at home. It still isn't the same.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive into, thank you, Carol, very much. And thank you, John. We've got a bunch of questions here, so I want to get to as many as possible, hopefully all of them, because I'm a perfectionist. So if you've got questions, go ahead and ask. We will get to them as quickly as possible. The first question I actually want to throw out at Chrissie, and of course, John and Carol, feel free to weigh in. But Jess, this is Charlotte Fullerton McDuffie at 7:08 p.m. Sarah has a question about intrusive thoughts that may or may not be false memories. How can you be sure they don't really happen, and what do you do about them? So I think this is specifically about, false memories, how to discern whether or not false memories are real memories, and how to cope with false memories.
Oh, yikes. So the easy answer is you'll never know, live with the uncertainty. No, I don't want to.
This is an hour long, Chrissie. Stretch it, baby.
That's why I do fireside chats about people's feelings, not about this is, I'm just gonna be honest here. Like, false memory is one of those really tough topics that I've only done one video on my YouTube channel about, because I'm always so afraid that there's so many rabbit holes you can go down with them, and I'm going to say the wrong things, and I'm going to say all the stuff or get reassurance.
You've got Jon and Carol to correct you, so you're fine.
That's always good. Yeah, I can't wait. I'll jump in.
I don't want to assume yet, though, because I always get emails assuming. So quickly, let's define what a false memory is, so people that are watching that may not know the term.
Jon?
Yeah, what's interesting, the blog that I wrote on false memories consistently was the #1 viewed blog on my website for a really long time, right? So people want to know about this because it's a very scary manifestation of OCD. But the term false memories actually means a couple of different things. So there's a technical term, and maybe someone can correct me if I get this wrong, but there's a technical term of false memories, which is an actual thing, which is a memory that you have of an event that did not occur. And there's various psychological experiments that can be run that can give people false memories through suggestion, for example. So that's what the technical term false memories means. But usually when people with OCD are worrying about false memories, what they're really saying is, I have a thought, and I don't know if the thought is a memory of something that happened that I'm afraid of that would be really bad, or if it's just one of my regular intrusive thoughts that I have all the time about something that could happen, right? Mm-hmm. So those people aren't actually having false memories. They're having thoughts, and they're struggling with uncertainty about, is it a thought that is just one of these free-floating kind of words that pop in your head, or is it a thought that coincides with actual recollection of an event that actually did occur? Some people take it a step further and get kind of meta with it, where the concern is, what if I develop a false memory? So I have an intrusive thought about having molested a child in a public restroom, and I know it's my OCD, and I'm thinking I should go back into the stall and check and make sure there's no evidence, no children there, or something like that, and that's going to comfort me. They think, no, I shouldn't do that. I'm an OCD therapy, and I should do the exposure. I say, maybe it happened, maybe it didn't happen. I should move forward and accept the uncertainty. But what if I continue to ruminate on it, and several hours later or days later, I convince myself that it was a memory, and now I haven't gone back to check because days have passed, and now I'm really in a bad situation, because even though I know I didn't, I believe I did. Mm-hmm. And that's basically where you're getting into sort of the pluperfect subjunctive of OCD, where it's finding these very clever pathways through semantics to get you to think that you're solving a problem that's not a problem. Right. A memory is a thought, and a thought is a thought, is a thought, is a thought, is a thought. And so if you become too attached to what kind of thought it is, just like if you get too attached to, is this an okay thought to have or an OCD thought to have, that's where the OCD really thrives. That's where it gets its lifeblood, So it can be very challenging to treat, because the fear can be so intense and so reinforcing that in some ways doing exposure to it ends up being the compulsion that creates the new memory. Yes. Of, is it a false memory? And you can kind of get lost in the weeds with it. Nonetheless, I say it's difficult. It can be difficult to treat. I don't mean to say that it's any less treatable than any other kind of OCD. You just have to learn how to find the underlying fear and do exposure to what that actually is.
From a lived experience perspective of false memory, and often I can relate this to clients, is the inability to recreate the emotion of the memory. And so if I'm remembering something and then I'm remembering it, I want to remember the exact memory of how I felt and why I made these decisions, and you can't do that. Like if I'm visiting a memory from something when I was 15 years old, I can't recreate what my intention was or what the feelings were or why, considering I'm like, what's happening, Carol? Are you okay? I'm like, is she like raging against what I'm saying?
I think a patient just entered her office.
Get out.
She was like, you're wrong.
No, the light goes off if I sit too still.
Oh.
I was like, okay, I'm just gonna stop.
I'm sorry.
Interrupt.
Also, if she claps when you're talking, she's just turning off the light in the other room.
Anyway, that's all I have got.
Carol, do you have anything to add on it?
Carol, please.
Well, I agree with what both Jon and Chris. I'm sorry. You have to go after what Chrissie said. Eventually, you have to, Sarah. You have to go back to that. Leaning into, you will never know if it's a false memory or not, or if you actually did something or not.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that usually with that, people go, yeah, but what if I did something terrible and I need to go confess? Number one, when you do go to the police station, they will know in about 30 seconds that you have OCD when you try and confess. But you have to sit with that you will never know, because all of your trying to figure it out is just making the thought that you did something worse. You hang on to it tighter versus letting it go. Or you can go after it and say, oh, who cares what I did?
That makes a lot of sense. I after all these years of advocacy, I only heard about false memories a couple years ago, and it was like I'd never heard that term, and I was like, "What's that?" And when somebody explained it to me, it really scared me, because the visual I got was like OCD showing up with photographic evidence. You know,
Yeah.
it was, and that's and it was like one of OCD's tricky, like, yeah, you think I got you now? It's not just a thought. Look, proof. Here are pictures of it. You know, everywhere, pictures everywhere, and I was like, oh my God, that's twice as scary. So,
Yeah.
But it speaks to an important point, which is that memories are not events. Memories are thoughts. Memories are a kind of a combination of images and emotions that are held in a certain part of your brain that you associate with events that, you know, may or may not be true events, and that's how OCD kind of gets under your skin. But the big part of the confusion is this idea that the memories are photographic evidence, and therefore you're supposed to treat them differently from other thoughts.
Yes.
And you know, not to get, you know, too lost in mindfulness world, but I don't know that it's a fact that we should treat memories different from any other kind of thought. You know, just because it's a memory doesn't make them special. So I can remember what I had for dinner, or I could have a thought about what I'm going to have for breakfast, and there's no difference. Those are objects of attention arising in consciousness, and I have to make a choice with each of them whether or not it's the best use of my attention right now. And right now, neither of those are particularly important. I'm paying attention to you guys, and that's what I need to do.
and the other important fact to go ahead, Chrissie.
Well, just really quickly, I also, you know, Sarah, if this helps, one of the things that I do when I'm struggling with any sort of false memory is I also try to pinpoint what emotion comes up when this trigger and this intrusive thought comes in. So if I have a memory of something that happened when I was 21 years old, it's haunting me, I can never get rid of it because something happened. I also know that anytime I remember that memory, I'm also going to have a really strong emotional reaction. And I also know that that emotion can be tied into my compulsions. And so in moving forward, if I need to do some ERP about it, I also include that emotion. Every time I have that memory, I'm going to have a spike in anxiety. I'm going to feel very sad because maybe I hurt someone. And so then once I do ERP with the actual emotion, I can more easily experience that memory without feeling like the emotion is dragging me down the rabbit hole. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's just a way that really helps me, and a kind of a little suggestion that helps people when they're dealing with this.
That's great. And I think to bring it back around full circle, back to your original first comment, which is like, despite what OCD throws, despite the tricks, despite it up in the ante, at the end of the day, it's your mic drop comment, which is just like, embrace the uncertainty, accept the uncertainty. The ERP doesn't change just because OCD is whipping out new weapons and tools to scare us, so to speak. So I think it's important to come back around. Charlotte, who just asked that question, by the way, said someone is now obsessing over what Jon just said about the fly, which is hilarious because you mentioned the fly coming through
Way
the
to go,
vent.
Jon.
So,
Apparently, I also threw someone into an existential crisis. I'm looking at the comments now. I think I'm just going to turn them off.
we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah. Sorry.
We aren't responsible for anything Jon does or says. I do want to bring up.
I might not have done it. Just for the record.
Yeah, exactly. So David, hey David, thank you for joining us. I actually want to bring up, I know you're asking a question. I want to get to more intrusive thought questions, but David Dowdy at 7:12 p.m. I just think this is a great point, which is one of my obsessions was living and surviving a pandemic. Now that it has become a reality, I realize that the obsession was far worse mentally than the actual pandemic. Any tips on helping the normal-minded people navigate through uncertainty of COVID-19? He's basically asking, can those of us with OCD that have had exposure response prevention and have a better tools and skill set of dealing with uncertainty, what can we do to help those that don't? But before we address that, I really think it's important what David touches on, which is this anticipatory anxiety and this fearing the things that haven't happened yet. I read an interesting book years ago when I was undiagnosed and struggling and just looking for answers. And it was actually a really good book, had nothing to do with OCD, but it was on fear and how fear morphs. And it made this interesting comment where it said, nobody with cancer is afraid of getting cancer.
Right.
So everybody before they had cancer might have had a fear of getting cancer, but once they had cancer, they were no longer afraid of that anymore. The fear shifted to something else. So it's very interesting to know that, most of the times what's in our head is far scarier than the actual reality of the situation is. Does anybody want to weigh in on that before we move to the second part of the question?
It's the reason people are so inhibited from accepting uncertainty. I mean, just like we were talking about false memories, like what if I did some sort of terrible thing? Well, the idea is I would never be able to cope with that. Like if it were to come true, if this was a real memory and then it was the same as photographic evidence and it's something that apparently I did was so terrible that I blacked it out and I can't remember it. Now it's being revealed to me and now it means I'm this terrible person. I could never cope with a life where I didn't get that certainty, that life where I had to consider that maybe I was a murderer. And when we do exposure, we're saying, well, let's see. Right? Let's practice coping with that. Let's practice living in a world where you don't have the answer. And let's see if it's as bad as you say it is. I mean, it's not going to be a picnic, not at first, of course, but is it really as bad as you thought it was going to be? And usually the brain kind of shuts off. I mean, I think that's what can be useful if it's done well with some forms of imaginal exposure, where the OCD says, well, if you don't do the compulsion, this thing's going to happen. It's going to be so bad. And then what the sufferer does is cuts the OCD off at that point. Says, no, don't. I'll just do the compulsion. Just stop bothering me, right? But if we don't let them do that, and we actually have the OCD talk itself out and tell the full story, eventually it starts to kind of unravel and seem like, well, that seems like pretty intense, but I've been through a lot of things in life. I guess I'll get through that. I don't really know. We so rarely let the OCD finish its point because we get so scared that we won't be able to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of what really inhibits people from accepting uncertainty is this idea that they can't cope with it. And exposure is practicing that coping, not with the event coming true, but with the uncertainty, with the not having the answer.
So Chrissie, David's second question is any tips on how can we help people navigate through the uncertainty of COVID-19? My question to David actually is, one, is he just talking about anybody that's struggling? Or two, what we've been seeing a lot in our own communities and I'm experiencing myself are, maybe what we need to do to live healthfully through this, live mentally healthily through this crisis may not be enough for people that may not have OCD but want to wash their hands twice as long, or they want to clean off things a lot more than we would because we know that we need to still respect our OCD and ERP boundaries. And so I know a lot of people have asked, well, how do I tell my parents that I'm doing what I need to do for me inside of the CDC guidelines, but I'm going to stop at 20 seconds. I'm not going to do your minute. You don't get it. So I'm not quite sure where David's coming from in terms of helping other people navigate, but do you have thoughts on maybe either people with or with? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think that, as soon as that question came up, I have a lot of emotions and feelings about this. Navigating COVID has been way more emotional for me than anything. But I think that, unfortunately, in the community, I feel so frustrated for OCD therapists, where and for so long it's been very much this, okay, go lick that doorknob and it's going to be all right, and you can do this or whatever. And now you're put in this position where you are actually having to do these mechanisms that are, I'm going to do it, keeping us safe. I just had to do quotes, but I did because we're on an OCD talk. But anyway, and so I think, and then also, Ethan, I think the other part about this is what we are used to doing as individuals with OCD is challenging that status quo about whatever it is that's being intrusive. And right now, and in the last 6 weeks, it has become increasingly difficult from the lens of shame, from the lens of guilt, from the lens of, well, if I'm going to challenge this, then I'm an absolute asshole because I'm killing people. You know what I mean? And so does that make sense? It's this feeling of, well, I want to do what's correct, of course, by the WHO guidelines and CDC and whatever your state is telling you. But at the same time, I can't dive into the rabbit hole of being able to overcompensate for stuff, because I have to think about my mental health and I have to think about where that's going to lead me. And so that presents, again, like kind of going back what we were talking about earlier, just this shame and this guilt about being someone with OCD in an environment now where everybody is engaging in behaviors that would make us worse.
Carol,
I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for, but I just went down that way.
There's no, it's all, do you have additional thoughts, Carol? I see you thinking or writing or doing both.
Just don't hit the lights.
Okay. What we're doing, I hear what Chrissie's saying. What I'm saying to people, because I'm getting a lot of pushback about, yeah, but we need to do what the CDC is telling us to do. And I'll say, okay, do what the recommendations are, but do no more, do no less, because your OCD will still get dissatisfied with that in some way, shape, or form. And as far as like helping other people with the COVID, one is people are upset about how long is it going to go on? How bad is it going to get? How many people are going to die? When are they going to get a vaccine? Is it going to be changed forever? Is it ever going to go back to the way it was? And again, you really have to sit and marinate in this. I don't know. We don't know. The experts don't know. This is a new ball game.
I was apparently at a ball game last year. According to Facebook, they show your memories, where you were the year before on that day. I was apparently at a baseball game, surrounded with like 20,000 people watching the Orioles lose as usual. And, I wonder about that. Like, when is it going to be normal to be in a setting like that? Will it be in a year? Will it be in 5 years? Will it be ever? I really don't know. I don't need to know, but I'm admittedly curious. I'm just trying to be mindful of that curiosity because it's normal. And I don't want to do the shame thing where it's like, well, I shouldn't be thinking about that right now. That's okay to think about it, but I don't want to confuse myself into thinking that thinking about it will somehow affect the outcome.
Exactly. Or thinking about it is going to hurry it along.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, that's a great point. Thank you. So unfortunately, when we get a lot of comments, my screen shifts and I can't go backwards. So I remember what I was going to ask, but Jess, if you see a comment, it was from a woman saying that she has a safe word. I liked that question. I may see it down before, but it was something about a safe word and how does she let this safe word go? If you happen to see that and can pull it up for afterwards, that would be great. But real quick, Robert Benitez, I don't see his question, but he had two questions, which I remember, which was one, Carol, his first question was, can his OCD use a feedback loop that may be convincing him that he has depression, and can his OCD convince him that he's depressed when he really is or isn't?
Sure. Sure. I actually, I've seen that before where they go, they watch some show about depression and then they go, oh, what if I have depression and I don't know it? What if I have a substance abuse problem and I don't know it? And then they start to check and look and start to look on the internet, and then they're off and running. Yeah.
Or what if I convince myself that I'm depressed, and then that leads me to harm myself, even though I wouldn't normally be depressed, but because I did these behaviors. It's kind of like the false memory thing again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it works. I remember being 8 years old and watching Punky Brewster. I know that I'm dating myself, but whatever. But in the episode, she had a stomach pain on her right hand side, and it ended up being appendicitis. And I thought I had appendicitis for 3 years. Thank you, Punky Brewster. So I totally, I relate to that, and no way minimizing, but I get it. Robert also had a question. I normally don't do 2 questions, but this is an important thing. And it was more of a statement, but he said he's going to therapy, but it's really hard because every day he comes home and he has new obsessions and new compulsions. So let's go ahead and nip it in the bud about how, OCD can shift and you can come home with something new every day, but the therapy is the therapy. Chrissie, you got words. I can see them coming out your eyeballs.
Well, one of the things that always stuck with me when I did, my therapist was Dr. Stephen Phillipson. And one of the things that really stuck with me when I was in therapy and ERP therapy, and I continue to see this as I'm doing therapy through my recovery, whenever I get spiked up with anything else, is he always expressed that OCD will actually up the intensity of spikes as you are working through ERP. So I translated that into my own recovery. I can only speak for myself, but I translated that into my recovery also as I'm working through a specific theme. I try to think about it as that part of the brain is trying to clean out all the corners. It's trying to turn over all of the rocks, trying to make sure that I am sure that this isn't a threat. As I'm doing ERP and telling my brain, this is not a threat. See, I'm exposing myself to it. It is going to actually be more intense. And so let's say I'm struggling with sexual orientation OCD, then, if I'm doing ERP, like 3 or 4 days later, all of a sudden it's like, am I transgender? And then it's like, oh, wait, but am I actually attracted to my mother, or am I attracted to my female dog, or whatever? So it's just cleaning out the corners as I am fighting back, making sure that we are covering all ground, because it needs to make sure that if I think it's not a threat, it's going to throw everything at me so it doesn't fail at his job to keep me safe. That's my thoughts.
I think OCD can only play that game if we agree to a contract with the OCD that when it changes the words of the thoughts, we're going to treat it like it's new thoughts. If we disagree with that concept, we can let go of the whole themes discussion and boil it down to one thing. So it's not that I have 17 different obsessions. It's that I have 17 different ways of expressing the same obsession. I mean, Chrissie, you just gave multiple examples of one fear, which is, what if my assumed identity is not my real identity? Gay, transgendered, bad person, murder, whatever it is. The fear there is just, what if I'm not who I think I am? Mm-hmm. And so it's just different manifestations of uncertainty. It's all the same junk, just with the OCD using different words, sort of trying to figure out a way to get back in because you've evicted it and it wants back in. Mm-hmm. So understanding that it will do that, and then saying, no, I refuse to treat this like it's different. My position is to look for how it's the same, and the moment I can figure out how it's the same, I'm going to treat it the same. Oh, this is about me not really being who I think I am? Well, maybe I'm not. What's for breakfast?
So just to further hit this home, because I think this is important, Carol, I just remember being at the OCDI and, I forgot who it was, some less brilliant therapist than you, because it wasn't you. But, they quickly said, content for OCD is irrelevant. And they immediately described a tornado. Tornado is the OCD, right? And wherever the tornado goes, it's going to suck in a bunch of stuff, cars, cows, houses, whatever. But really what it's sucking in is irrelevant. It's still all the OCD. Can you just hit that home and clarify that a little bit more? Why is the content irrelevant?
Because the underlying mechanism is the same. It doesn't matter. I'm losing my train of thought. So it's going to be one thing, and as soon as you calm that down, it's going to be something else. The content is irrelevant. With intrusive thoughts like sexual and violent thoughts, a lot of times people get wigged out and think they're worse because of the content of it, but it's the same as contamination. The thing that's fueling it is the same. I like the tornado analogy too. That's great.
Oh, it might have been yours. Yeah, it might have been yours. Definitely, for sure. And I think that, I mean, go ahead, Chrissy. I know you have a thought about this.
How can you tell?
Because I know you. Go ahead.
Because my face is like, I do want to drive that home. I also do, from the sufferer's perspective, just want to throw something out there. And certainly we can even open discussion about this. I would love to hear everybody's perspective on it. But yes, content, when it comes to like the behavioral aspect of OCD, 100% irrelevant. I've experienced probably any possible intrusive thought ever and have used ERP and have been able to get the same results. I would like to throw out there, though, that there is often, and let's get away from the behavioral for a minute, just this emotional experience that people have often when it comes to harm and pedophilia. Not that they are different and not that they're any worse or any harder to treat or any of that, but there is just this added layer emotionally for people to go through in the healing and grieving process. I think when it comes down to, even if the core fear is I'm a bad person or a sexual deviant or whatever we're dealing with, but I just wanted to point that out because I work with a lot of clients who go into ERP therapy and then in getting kind of the emotional support piece of it, say that they feel like the therapy is not addressing that underlying hardcore shame, guilt, embarrassment, and just the really what kind of person, what kind of like the kind of that belief of what kind of bad person would have pedophilia thoughts. And for prolonged amount of time, if someone's having it for like 10 years and then they finally get diagnosed and they finally get treated. I just wanted to bring that up, and I would love to hear anyone's commentary. I'm certainly not saying that they are different and they're not treatable, because we all know that they are, because it is behaviorally, yes, but just emotionally, sometimes people feel left out from the kind of added step of the grieving and the shame piece that they have to go through when it comes to really just some of those intrusive thoughts that kind of, tap on that. I am a horrible person for having these thoughts. I
definitely want to get Carol and Jon's thoughts. I want to get to questions, definitely, but it's definitely worth having this conversation about. No. I wouldn't have turned to you and said your thoughts if I didn't know what you were going to say. I knew exactly what you were going to say. But I think that, and I want to turn to Carol because Carol's been running an intrusive group for 14 years. But like the first thing I think of is, well, is that because A, OCD is so misunderstood in the community, and B, then if it is understood to a certain extent, most people only believe that it's hand washing, contamination, neatness, and all that stuff. So even the people that and I don't mean in the OCD community, I mean in the media and mainstream community, that even their understanding of OCD is really just the surface of what they think it is. And so therefore, when they hear this other stuff, it just isn't talked about enough. And because other people don't hear about it in the media, they're maybe experiencing intrusive thoughts, that they don't talk about it enough. So it's even there's double secretive, double shame, double stigma, and so forth. And I think that's what Chrissy's hitting on. What have you seen, Carol, sort of in the evolution of intrusive thoughts, even from 14 years ago or 30 years ago, in terms of like how secretive it was before, how secretive it is now, the shame? Are people more open about it now? Are we getting better with it? Are we kind of staying in the same place?
I think for the person who has OCD, they still are being quite secretive and not sharing with people, because they think that their thoughts are different, even if they've read Jon's book or Lee Bayer's book, The Imp of the Mind. So maybe they know that there's sexual and violent obsessions, but what they always say in group is, but my thoughts are different than all of your thoughts. Mm-hmm. So when at the start of the intrusive thoughts group, every time they have to write on the board what their intrusive thought is that they're focusing on, and then they have to go around and read it out loud. And what unfailingly happens is everyone's quite compassionate with everyone else's thoughts, but then they say, but my thought is different. I could be a pedophile. that person over there, they wouldn't hurt a child in a million years. And so, yes, I think the world is getting more educated, but I think the individual sufferers are still isolating themselves.
So, Jon, what is, just a last follow-up to this question? Chrissie, am I touching on what you wanted to sort of address?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
I just appreciate the conversation around it, just so we can open it up to people to hear. It's so important.
So, Jon, content is irrelevant. We've established that. But obviously, relationship to the content is different per person. Mm-hmm. Why is it, and maybe I answered it, but why is sexual, violent, intrusive thoughts, why is a sufferer's relationship to that even more stigmatizing in a lot of ways, more guilt-driven, more shameful than someone who is maybe just hand-washing or checking or health anxiety? Not at all minimizing. That's what I had. I was miserable. But why might there be a more shameful component?
Well, a couple things come to mind. First, as you kind of just alluded to, I don't think it's necessarily true that the hand washers and the lock checkers are feeling less shame than the people with pedophilia-themed OCD. It depends on their personal cultural context, what it means to them to have that problem. This is a condition that highlights the worst thing that you can think. And so the worst thing that I can think is different from the worst thing that you can think is different from the worst that you can think. It highlights the worst thing you could think as the thing you cannot accept uncertainty about. You can accept uncertainty about a lot of things, including coronavirus, but you can't accept uncertainty about, and there's your obsession. And that's the battle, right? So it's irrelevant in the sense of the treatment is, let's do exposure to that uncertainty. Where it becomes relevant and should be addressed in the treatment is, how does that person navigate shame? It is very normal to feel shame if you think you're a pedophile and you live in a culture where that word is used to describe people that we don't want in our society, right? So it's a natural reaction, but it's part of the cultural narrative. That's not the part that's about your OCD. That's a more personal thing about how do you deal with the fact that the content of your thoughts is the worst thing that you can think. Now, the content of that person's thoughts is also the worst thing that they can think, but you're my client, so don't worry about them right now, right? So you do have to take some time to address that. The shame is real and needs to be brought into the room and understood as a natural process, as a natural reaction to thinking the worst thing that you can think. Mm-hmm. You had suggested something about stigma and how these things are talked about. I think that's definitely adds another layer to it. I mean, even in this group, not with this panel, but what we did last week, right? There was someone talking about their intrusive thoughts, and someone said, "Oh, well, that's really weird. You shouldn't have those kinds of thoughts. That's not OCD." Mm-hmm. Someone who didn't really understand how hurtful they were being, or if they did, they're really not very nice people. So absolutely, there's this added layer of, when you hear other people's thoughts and you think, whoa, that's really messed up. Now, I almost never see that in the OCD community. As Carol, you were pointing out, you're generally very compassionate towards other people with OCD, but not towards ourselves.
Right.
The one thing I want to add to this too is that I think they should add terminal uniqueness to the criteria in the DSM for diagnosing OCD. Right? Because it's a factor in every single person's OCD that there's something about this thing, which I learned about by reading about other people who have this thing, that I'm doing differently. Mm-hmm. And it's without that uniqueness, you wouldn't work so hard to solve the problem. It's like, oh, that's OCD, intrusive thoughts about knives and stabbing my baby. Oh, yeah, well, lots of people have that. Okay, I don't worry about it. No. But mine, it's got like a little bit of a different thing to it, which I really need to make sure that I get on top of this. And then that's where the engine starts getting revved up. This is worth all this attention because it's not like everybody else's OCD. But that is a symptom of the OCD, the uniqueness. I
can relate to that 1,000 times over, especially like, I think for people that have gone longer periods of time without getting diagnosed or getting treatment, then that further supports my argument that my OCD is different from everybody else's, because why is it taking me so long to get better? And I know for a fact, when I was at the OCDI and everywhere else and people were talking about their OCD, that was my internal dialogue the whole time. Well, yeah, but that's not my OCD. My OCD is completely different. All the time with everything. And even in Carol's groups, I remember people talking and like, my OCD at that time, and still is, was self-harm OCD. I was afraid that I was going to accidentally kill myself through a variety of methods, impulsively do it. So my constant narrative in my head was, well, who cares if you're going to molest a child? I could die. You're not going to die. I'm going to die.
Yeah, you'll get through it. You'll cope.
What's worse than death? How can you all be so selfish? What's worse? Until I met the person that was afraid of with the hell, and then I was like, oh, that's after I die. Oh, never mind. That's worse.
Yeah.
No, like, I totally relate to that uniqueness, and that was definitely such a major barrier for me to get over to then be able to work my actual problem. Because before, I just thought my OCD was so special that it deemed some sort of novel treatment that didn't exist.
And the uniqueness is also shame driven, because if you were to drop that, the moment the first therapist said, no, it's not unique, it's just OCD, you'd have to face a wall of shame over how much effort you put into something that you didn't need to do. So we cling to our obsessions a little bit in treatment because we're afraid, sorry, with the light, we cling to our obsessions. So we're a little bit afraid if we give them up too soon, we have to admit how much time we lost that we're never going to get back. And so that uniqueness holds the shame in.
That's so huge. I want to thank everybody for listening as we had that conversation. I think it was an important conversation to discuss. Now we'll call this the 30-minute lightning round, where we would get to your questions and spitfire answers to work our way through the next 45 minutes of questions. I'm excited. Hands on buzzers, fasten seatbelts. Here we go. 7:15 p.m. Rebecca Youngblood Potter says, going to the grocery store is always a trigger of intrusive thoughts. Fear of running out of food and my family not loving me anymore because I can't provide them the right food. In normal circumstances, I have been great since Since COVID, I haven't. If I could take one of my teenage sons or my husband with me, it'd be okay. But my country isn't allowing that. My husband has been doing all the shopping. Should I tackle this or continue to have him do all the shopping? So I will quickly say that the longer we avoid fear, the bigger the fear becomes. I think that's pretty much the gist of it. So, but I will throw this out to Chrissie.
I think that if it's in regards to living with OCD, if it is something that you are having a behavioral reaction to, compulsions, it is something that you are fearing, absolutely push into the uncertainty. Absolutely start taking steps to do that. We're in these unprecedented times of COVID, we do have guidelines of what we can and can't do. That is the great thing. OCD doesn't have guidelines, but the CDC does. So as long as you're taking those precautions, and if you really are up to challenging this, absolutely do it. And Chris Tronson in our fireside chat the other day, we were talking about just being committed. If it's, okay, I'm going to do this one thing per day and I'm not going to do these compulsions during the COVID, or I'm going to do them for X amount of time, fine, but make that decision beforehand. Find ways of pushing into the uncertainty, because it doesn't matter what's going on in our world. We still have to challenge OCD every single day, because fear doesn't stop no matter whether all of the restaurants and everything around us does.
That's great advice. Follow-ups, Jon or Carol, to that?
This is an opportunity. She needs to go for the gusto. Worst possible case scenario, stick somebody else in the car with her, but leave them in the car. She needs to go and try and do it. What is the worst thing that could happen? She gets groceries that somebody doesn't like. She has an anxiety attack. She cries. All stuff that she can live with. That's a great exposure. She has to do it.
Absolutely. That's excellent. By the way, guys, go ahead, Jon. Yeah.
Just very, very quickly. There's a deeper obsession embedded in the question. She said that if she can't provide for her family, something like they won't continue to love her.
To love her. That was the longer question.
Yeah, I think if that's the case, that she should get a new family. Yeah, but basically, if your family is going to just drop you the moment you don't provide for them, then they don't. That's not what family's about. So I actually would. While I agree that you could confront the grocery store obsession, I think the larger obsession to confront is this idea that you'll be abandoned by the people who love you if you don't perform. It's their love for you is not contingent on your performance.
That's great advice. I urge everyone, there's so many great comments that I want to make sure to get everybody's questions, so I'm not going to read them all, but please urge our panelists as well as our viewers to read the comments, because there's really, really great insight. And some people, also Carol, a few people are amazed that you're still drinking Diet Coke. So Carol's continuing to be a huge fan. I'm excited that that I thought of Carol
Cool.
because my street cred is going to go skyrocket after this. I'm so psyched. I should have given this to Jess ahead of time. At 7:21 p.m., Charlene Marie asks, I hear a lot about ACT therapy, which is acceptance commitment therapy, and mindfulness skills accompanying ERP, exposure response therapy, as an effective approach to treating OCD. And I am curious if any of you have experienced other approaches that have been helpful in treating OCD in addition to ERP. Curious if any of you have used internal family systems therapy as an approach to work with OCD symptoms. I am familiar with ACT, and I can weigh in my own personal experience, but I haven't heard internal family systems. Jon or Carol, do you want to touch on that at all?
What we do here is we do have a family track that goes along with the person has a behavior therapist and they have a family therapist. The focus of the family therapy is to help, number one, educate them about the OCD and about family accommodation, which is about how the family inadvertently helps the person to ritualize or to avoid. It may be something overt like buying toiletries for the person, or it could be waiting for them while they're continuing to ritualize in the house. That's the focus of the family therapy. I don't know about internal family systems. But we do believe in having family therapy in addition to ERP so that the family can support you in a way that's helpful.
Internal family systems is a school of thought that you have sub-personalities that interact with one another as a system, like a family in your head, and that you can use those interactions to better understand your circumstances and affect some kind of insight and some kind of change. I have heard of people using this to treat OCD, but I don't know that there's any research that supports it. It's not something I've ever done. I do, kind of going off of what Carol was talking about, think that not internal family systems, but family systems concepts in general, I'm a marriage and family therapist, are an important part. The OCD is never a one-man project or a one-woman project. It always involves the people around you and how you interact with them and what they mean to you and what you mean to them. And so, bringing people into that equation and thinking systemically, not just what does this compulsion do to send a signal to my brain that I should stay immersed in this fear, but also how does this compulsion affect the way that I interact with my daughter, and how does that affect her behavior, which then affects how my wife behaves, affects how I behave. So seeing the bigger, more integrated picture can be a very important part of the OCD treatment. One person in a family is doing ERP, they all have to be doing some kind of exposure to some kind of discomfort in order for that to work.
Right.
And then quickly to just speak from my own personal experience, I found acceptance commitment therapy and DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, very, very effective in my own treatment with OCD. I will say that ERP is the gold standard benchmark. It is the reason I stay well today and have been relapse free. Should I knock wood or no, not knock wood, whatever, we won't knock wood, for 10 years. But I will say my own personal experience was I did 10.5 months of ERP for 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. And I was having a trouble grasping and letting go and engaging in ERP because of 30 years of enabling and ritualizing and getting reassurance from people around me because we weren't in the right kind of treatment. And so what ACT did for me was it changed my relationship to my thoughts and completely changed the way I viewed my thoughts. And also DBT completely regulated my emotions, where I would engage in an exposure, and then the minute I was triggered, I would fall on the floor in a puddle of tears. I'm sure at some point Carol heard me screaming and went, "Oh, Ethan again." So I think that from like an adjunct perspective, I think ACT and DBT were really crucial, and then opening sort of a window in my OCD to get the ERP in there and really, really punch the OCD away. So I found those extremely, wonderful adjunctive therapies to treatment, but not in replace of. So John Smith at 7:23 p.m. Can people without contamination OCD symptoms shift into contamination with all the germ news attention? Could this pandemic push people who are predisposed to OCD into full-blown OCD?
Yes.
Carol, go ahead.
Yes, most people, the old stats used to be 80% of people diagnosed with OCD would at some time in their life have contamination obsessions. So most people will go through a stint with the hand washing. That said, I agree with their concern. I think many people who are subclinical, meaning they might have some vulnerability or some family history of OCD, that the COVID, the stress of all of it may tip them into being symptomatic. Now, the good thing is it will be newer, or the obsessions about COVID-19 will be newer. And so it's that much more amenable, I think, to getting into treatment and getting help.
Go ahead, Jon.
I don't know if, I mean, certainly someone could develop OCD like symptoms if they don't have the other predispositions. I don't know if it might just kind of settle back into the way you're predisposed after the pressures to be vigilant go away, or if it develops into the full-blown issue that then requires additional treatment. That's probably going to vary from person to person. In terms of whether someone who's sort of primarily obsessional in nature or doing mental rituals, whether they could develop contamination OCD. In my experience, a significant portion of contamination OCD clients, by which we're meaning the people who avoid and wash as their primary compulsions, are really dealing with a form of moral scrupulosity. They're washing because it would be immoral not to, because they're afraid of breaking some sort of morality rule. And that's really just not that far off from the other kinds of intrusive thoughts that people have. So I think it's very natural for it to extend to, if I don't wash my hands, it means that I'm okay with, spreading COVID and killing people.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, just to chime in there, I mean, I typically am going to deal with intrusive thoughts with mental rituals, but I also have the fear of vomiting. And so, Ethan, as you know,
There were
that also
two cases recently that said profuse vomiting.
Why would you even tell me that? Like, especially while we're live.
It's fine. It's fine.
What do you want from me? Anyway, but with that, I've never considered myself to really have outward compulsions that most people would be able to visibly see, or that could indicate that I have OCD, but certainly contamination stuff comes into play when it has to do with the fear of vomiting. So, and so it totally interchanges from that into sexual, violent, intrusive thoughts. And then, if I take a bite of chicken and it's raw in the middle, then all of a sudden I'm washing my damn hands for the next 24 hours, or resisting, or messaging Ethan and having him make me laugh. So it's not as bad.
Exactly. I will just tell you, Carol, you're continued to love. People want to call you on your office phone and see what happens. Just saying. So you're like, I can't even get to a question because there's so many fans of you. So real quick, we don't need to bring this up, Jess, but Jennifer Vickery, this just speaks to sort of what Chrissie began talking about, and we kind of went off and had a conversation. She said, I'm seeing so many people without OCD going way beyond the suggested guidelines, and I find what I am trying to not go, and I find that when I am trying to not go beyond the guidelines, I do feel shame and doubt about what I am doing, as well as the fear of judgment from others that I'm not being careful.
Yes.
So that's what we were talking about.
I'm so glad that she brought that up, the judgment piece too.
Yeah, and I think that was a great way to put it. Our next question, Jess, is 7:28 p.m. Gabby Alessi Friedlander Bauer Sox. I think I got that right. So, and I'm going to throw this out to Chrissie, actually. How do you handle, because you're the shame expert, so how do you handle the feeling of shame? How do you handle the feeling of shame when you spike, especially when the obsessions aren't related to coronavirus and many of the life stressors people are facing, like job loss, etc., aren't at play for me?
Okay, so are we specifically, I don't see the question up there, but are we specifically talking about COVID, or are we talking about intrusive thoughts in general?
She's just saying, how do you handle how do you handle the feeling of shame when you spike? And she's like, well, other people are stressing about COVID. I'm not, nor my job or anything else. I'm having other things, and I'm feeling a lot of shame, I guess, A, about that, and B, for not worrying about COVID.
Okay. I will answer. I want to go ahead and address just the shame piece anyway. When it comes to intrusive thoughts, I am, I'm just a shame machine. Like I feel like I feel like I wake up with it. I feel like I deal with it all the time. And it is just a byproduct of living with OCD since I was younger. And the way that I've learned to manage it, just to give you just kind of my experience here, is I've also recognized that shame is just part of my journey with OCD. So as I said before, emotions can really, they can accompany compulsions. They can accompany spikes. So the last intrusive thoughts I've had have been about an injury, which is a real event. It's something that's real event, but my OCD attached onto it and my life spun out of control for about 1.5 years. But one of the biggest driving factors of that was sadness and shame. And so what I needed to do in my ERP is what I've had to do in the 30 years that I have lived with OCD is identify these heavy emotions that drag me back down the rabbit hole, shame being one of the biggest ones. And I almost have to ERP those emotions before I even do the behavioral ERP for whatever the intrusive thought is. So one of the ways I do that is I flush out that by doing imaginal exposures, I flush out all of the horrible emotions first before I even go into the content of my ERP. So I can be like, okay, bring it on. Let's go. Let's feel shame. Let's feel sadness. Let's feel anger. Let's feel all of this. And then I go into my ERP. And that way I'm already there. I'm already feeling it. I'm already accepting it and living in the uncertainty of how horrible those emotions are. And so when they show up, I'm not even afraid of them anymore. So it's basically for me, just like ERP, I just do it on the emotional side. And that's really served me in a way of being able to identify that shame is part of my experience with OCD. That is just the bottom line. So I can either accept that and open the door and let it in and give it some coffee, or I can wait for it to break down the door and drag me out screaming.
And I think,
So I don't know if that helps, but that's how I do it.
And I think, look, my automatic default as an OCD sufferer when I have a spike, my brain automatically goes to, what did you do wrong? You're broken. It's your fault. It does every time. It doesn't matter how many years I've been doing this. The first 5 or 6 seconds of when I'm struggling, or what I call have an OCD attack or whatever, that's what my brain says. And then my skills kick in. And the first thing you just have to remember is you're not your OCD. It's not a decision. It's a disease. And remember that remember your relationship to your OCD. And separate those two, because I think that's where that stigmatization comes from. And that spike in stigma and shame is really believing and self-identifying with your OCD versus continuously reinforcing and recognizing that you are not, in fact, your OCD. John?
Just one comment about the question, because I think what the questioner was getting at in part was a secondary emotion. Secondary emotions are trash. We don't need them. Just get rid of them. Guilt about shame. It's some other emotion, some clinging on emotion, kind of moonlighting as the important thing when it's not really the thing that needs to be addressed. She's describing feeling shame, but about her OCD stuff. But then there's all these other people out there with real problems that they're really worried about, and I'm still stuck on my OCD stuff. And I feel guilty about that. I feel guilty about worrying about my stupid problems when there's people out there dying of COVID. It's guilt about having shame. Drop the guilt. It's a distraction. Address the shame, because as Chrissie was saying, that's the work you have to do to stand up to your OCD. And these other emotions will come along like, hey, look at me. Look how angry you are about being sad. No, drop that. Just work on the sadness. It's a skill that you can develop. It's not easy, but that's where I would focus.
That's a great point, John. You can never be a politician because you're really good at answering the questions spot on. So,
too honest too.
I know. Jackie Sharif at 7:30 p.m. This is Carol. I'm going to throw this at you because this is a great question. Jess, you go ahead and put this up for Carol. What is the difference between an intrusive thought and a ruminative thought? Because you can't stop a thought, but then we are meant to stop a rumination because it's a compulsion. I get confused by this. I know there's definitely some target words in here you'll want to address, so go for it.
Oh, man. This is a question for Jason Krompinger from last week. So he's the rumination king over here where we are. So if you think about, I think of ruminating as trying to figure something out or thinking about a thought over and over and over again in an effort to let it go and move on to something else. So in a sense, the intrusive thought would be the obsession, and the ruminative thought is kind of like in my opinion, a mental ritual. And so the intrusive thought, you want to let it be there. And the ruminative thought, you can talk back to it and say, well, I can think about it till the cows come home, but that doesn't mean I'm going to be able to let it go. That doesn't mean I'm going to be able to figure it out.
That's it. Yeah, absolutely. John, do you want to add on, or Chrissy?
I agree.
Well, also, Carol, like, do we want to stop thoughts?
No. Let the thought come in. Let it happen. Make fun of it. Move on.
We want to stop thought processes.
OCD is created in a sense because of the solution that someone is applying to the thought that frightens them. Their solution to a scary thought is to try to get rid of it or suppress or control it and push it away. Don't think about, go back to don't think about being a pedophile. The more you try to not think about being a pedophile, it's like putting super glue on the thought, and you're going to think about it for hours and hours and hours. So you want to let that thought come in, let it be there, kind of hang out with you, and you go on and do the other things. The thing you can combat is the meaning that you put on the thought. Oh, that's terrible that I had that thought.
I always like to remind people what the word rumination means, because I grew up in the country on a cow farm. Rumination is what cows do, right? They eat the grass, it goes into one stomach, they vomit it up, chew it again, in the hopes that they will then, once they swallow that vomit, be able to digest it. And so rumination is doing exactly this. It's vomiting up a thought for the purpose of further digesting it so that you can swallow it and hopefully keep it down. And my advice is don't eat your own vomit. Sorry, Chrissy, I know this is probably a lot for you, but it's just the best way I can explain the futility of rumination.
My own ERP.
We don't stop thoughts, but absolutely we stop thought processes. We stop working on our thoughts. We stop trying to fix and change and choose our thoughts.
And we stop letting our thoughts kind of take us away and try to stay in the present moment.
Absolutely.
So excited I was there for that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I love dumping. We have time for one more question. I found one earlier. For those of you, a ton of questions, and I really appreciate it. I actually may go back and try to grab everybody's questions that we didn't answer and try to answer everyone's questions in a video. Maybe I'll grab everybody else and we'll come back. I actually like this question. So Rachel May at 8:16 p.m. Says, Chrissy and Ethan, now that you're out with your intrusive thoughts, how do people in the general public react when you talk about having intrusive thoughts? Do they get it? I think that's a great question, not only from an advocate perspective, but from I suffer and struggle with intrusive thoughts perspective. So I love your thoughts, Chrissy.
Yeah, I thank you for asking this question. And I just want to preface with, I experience this too when I'm working with someone who's in ERP therapy and getting support. People go, all I want to do is help people. I am now through therapy. I can get this under control. Let me go help people. And then they're like, wait, I don't want to talk about my intrusive thoughts out loud. And I was the exact same way. As soon as I got through effective treatment for OCD, I wanted to scream it and shout it to the skies. And then it was just this shame and feeling of, I don't want to tell anybody. What if they don't believe me? Or what if, I'm so embarrassed, and what if people don't understand OCD? But 15 years later is when I finally started talking out loud about it. And I will tell you, Rachel, that it is, depending on your delivery of how you're talking about it, because mental health is stigmatized. However, there are so many people out there that are struggling with mental health. People are really open and grateful for people that start talking out about it. Once you hear the personal lived experience and people can relate to it and have empathy. I mean, we're talking about 1 in 4 people who live with mental health struggles, which means they're also supporting or know someone with mental health struggles. When you put that story out there, as scary as it is, and as scary as it was for me, and if you follow me on my YouTube channel, you know I just blast it out. I don't even care. But the reception that I got from people, not only with OCD, but other mental health challenges as well, is just that it's a worldview change. It is, I'm going to say this and I'll kind of close out my thoughts with this. People who live with mental illness and people who work in the mental health sector, we just have this different viewpoint. We have this deep level of empathy for those that struggle in the silence of mental health. And so being able to be outspoken about it and share your experience, you would be surprised at how many people could relate to that, how it helps so much in your own healing, but also how your story can really empower someone else and really can help save lives.
I mean, I echo Chrissie's sentiments 1,000%. Honestly, you know, it helped me, made sense out of my life. 99% of the experiences have been amazing. I wouldn't have met any of these people without this, and also the insane community, the amazing community that I've met. I really don't have anything to add because I feel pretty much the exact same way as Chrissie. And I will tell you that, you know, you also don't have to, you can always come out in your own way. There's no right or wrong way to do it. You don't have to jump on YouTube and scream to the rooftops, you know, even just telling one other person. I mean, you know, I always say we talk about this every week or every time we do a stream, but, you know, everybody who asks a question or gives us a little insight into what they're going through, they're advocating, they're telling their story. And if you read, Rachel, if you read a lot of the questions and a lot of the people, even the questions we didn't get to, other people have responded with really, really great answers. And so 9 times out of 10, you'll find amazing support and amazing community. And I think I always said, like, I don't know, I feel like I can see the Matrix in life. You know, it's like you kind of have a perspective about life that maybe other people don't necessarily have. And, you know, I don't think I would trade my experiences because I feel very blessed and lucky for the people that are in my life and what I get to do and to be to all of you and be on this journey together. I think it's amazing. So that's a great question, Rachel. I want to round out with some final thoughts, Jon Hershfield.
Okay, so final thoughts. I'm never prepared for final thoughts. This is like when Stu asks us that what we're going to put on our billboard. I can never, like, it always freezes me up. So I think that, I guess the only thing I want to say is that what I'm seeing that I think is, and I'm just going to be watching it carefully as I continue to see people, is, you know, we've been in some version of lockdown for about 6 weeks now, and the way people are handling it, they're kind of, their walls are starting to come up, right? So I'm seeing a lot of parents who are like, okay, I've hit a wall. This is the amount of time I can spend with my kids without a break. Or we're seeing couples, you know, hitting their walls. We're seeing young people go like, okay, this is the amount of video games I can play. I need something else. So people are starting to get antsy now because, you know, I remember when this started, the day I left my office, it was this scramble of like, okay, let me email, you know, my clients that I'm going to, you know, just do teletherapy for a week and we'll see how this whole thing shakes out. Right. And I haven't left this room since, essentially. And so I guess I just want to let people know that if you're feeling now like you've been handling it really well, but soon you're not going to be handling it well because you've reached your limits, just know that seems to be the norm. And so whatever you're experiencing, whatever powerful feeling, if you're starting to feel defeated or you're starting to worry again, or you're starting to doubt your ability to get through this, none of those are signs that you're doing something wrong. This is just the next step in a process. And it's probably a totally healthy, normal way for your brain to, sorry, I guess we lost Ethan. Anyway, it's a healthy, normal way for your brain to start doing some recalculations. Like, oh, okay, this is going to go on for more than a week, more than 2 weeks, more than 4 weeks. Okay, we're at 6 weeks. So in that calculation process, it's normal to see a lot of different kinds of symptoms, mood symptoms, OCD symptoms pop up. That doesn't mean you're relapsing. That doesn't mean you're failing in any way. Just watch, just keep stepping back and watching, practice noticing. This is where mindfulness is your best skill set.
Mm-hmm.
Good luck out there.
So I'll just start, since Ethan isn't here to tell me to start, since we're already in this order, just to echo the mindfulness piece. Jon, thank you for bringing that up. Hey, Ethan. So I'm just going to go ahead, by the way. I just like Jon was saying, this has been an interesting journey. And as I stated when we first started talking, just the waves of what we've been experiencing, it was only like 4 or 5 days ago that I just felt really centered and excited and connected to nature in my backyard or whatever. And then the last 2 days, I've just felt this overwhelming fear of being depressed and not knowing if the world is going to go back to what it was, or not even knowing what it is, and feeling really scared. And the thing that really helps me is to continue to connect to this community and to know, just like Jon was saying, that just because I'm feeling like this today and just because I was feeling like this yesterday doesn't mean it's going to always feel that way. And I think that that's what we struggle with OCD, is that black and white. If I'm feeling this way now, that means it's never going to be this way again. And operating in those extremes anyway is also dangerous for those of us with OCD. But in general, how can we, or I, because I can only speak for myself, how can I practice mindfulness today and say, today on the spectrum, I'm way down here, and that's okay. And it doesn't say anything about me or my recovery or what I can bring to you today in hopes that I can help you feel less alone, or that I can walk alongside you, even if we're both struggling today. And then tomorrow I might feel somewhere different on the spectrum. So my final thoughts are, wherever you're at, it's okay. Because I guarantee you, everyone on this panel and all of the people that are here experiencing this with us right now are feeling the same way that you are now, or have been in the last few weeks. So give yourself some love, some self-compassion, and just some grace as you're working through this unprecedented times that none of us know how to get through, because we can, and we are walking through this together.
Thank you, Chrissie. Carol, did you get to speak?
What?
Did you get to speak?
Oh, okay. Ditto to what Jon and Chrissie are saying. Remember that you aren't alone. Just because you are stuck in your house does not mean that there aren't other people out there who understand what you're going through. Treatment providers are still meeting with people and picking up patients. So reach out and help will be there.
Thank you, Carol. I think that everybody, made a great point. I think that everybody's situation is unique to their own, but at the end of the day, there's this common humanity aspect, which is we're all dealing with this bigger thing together. And while our individual experiences may be different, we can definitely all lean on each other. And I think we have an amazing community to do that. Last of all, or toward the end of this thing, I definitely want to thank Jon, Chrissie, and Carol for joining us. I want to thank all of you for turning out. We had another great turnout. I was going to say, Carol, I know you're kind of stuck in the basements of the OCDI, but I just wanted to tell reading all of these comments, you've made such an impact on so many people. I really was just like, oh, I remember Carol. She did Intrusive Thoughts. We should have her on. But clearly, like, you've had this incredible impact on just thousands of people that all love you and just really appreciate all you've done, all the good work you've done. I wanted to call that out because I think it's
such a big compliment. Yeah.
And if you ever feel down, just go through the comments threads because everybody loves you. They also make fun of your Diet Coke and your furs in the back. But no, sincerely, thank you for all the work you do. Thank you for supporting those with intrusive thoughts and OCD and just giving of yourself the way you have. You've made a definitive impact on the community, and we're very grateful for all the work that you've done over the past 30 years. So thank you, Carol. Also, thank you, Jon and Chrissie. Some final thoughts. If we didn't get to a question or you really want to ask your question, you can always email the IOCDF below at info@iocdf.org. You can also email me at justethan@iocdf.org. That email address is in the comment threads. And guess what? I caught up on my emails today. Got no more. 0 in the inbox. So Stephanie in France, who gave me a lot of crap on Saturday for not getting to her email in a week, done. Responded to all of them. So feel free to email me. I'm not bitter about this at all. So just some, everybody knows I love them dearly. I just have to give a little crap where I can. Just some super, super quick announcements. Friday at 1 p.m. on the IOCDF and YouTube Facebook pages, as well as Peace of Mind, we will be having the Managing BFRBs group in the time of COVID. We've been having related disorder groups all week. We started with hoarding. We have BDD today. We will have BFRBs on Friday, and hopefully more continuing into the week. So you'll definitely want to tune into that. And then Saturday, we will have our 2 p.m. town hall. As usual, this will be a special State of the Union town hall with the executive director, Jeff Szymanski, board member Liz McInvale, and the president of the board, Susan Boaz, with lots and lots of updates and announcements regarding the IOCDF and upcoming events. As always, I want to thank the IOCDF. I want to thank Jess behind the scenes for putting up the questions. I again want to thank Jon, Chrissie, and Carol for joining us. Thank you for turning out, being amazing advocates for yourselves. We appreciate you. We're grateful for you. Stay safe, stay vigilant. Feel all the feels. Don't let OCD off the hook, especially during this time. As Carol said, this is a great time to punch it in the mouth. Thank you. We'll see you next time.